Welcome to the 7th episode of the AfterSessions. Henry Darger, the Janitor's Kingdom.
The hallways hold their breath, scrubbed to an aching shine. Every bin is a hollow throat emptied of history. Every floor a mirror that refuses to hold a shadow. The rooms have been decluttered until they are cold and hollow. Furniture stands sanitized, stripped of any human touch. No remains, no trace of life.
A janitor who was always quiet, always invisible. He erased the world's messes while the world forgot he existed. He moved like a secret through the corridors, a collector of things no one ever wanted. Henry Darger lived alone in a single rented room in Chicago. He didn't have any visitors, any phone calls, or any known friends. For decades, the world assumed his interior was as vacant as the trash cans he carried.
They were wrong. When Henry Darger died, his landlord opened the door to that room and stepped into the blinding light of an entire universe he had created himself. Thousands of pages pulsed with a feverish life. Vast illustrations of salvation, violence, and children fighting a war on the wall. This isn't just the story of a hidden artist. It's the story of what happens when the mind is left alone for too long and decides to create a world instead of living in one.
Born on April 12, 1892, in Chicago, at the age of 4, Darger lost his mother, Rosa Darger, when she gave birth to his baby sister, who was put up for adoption. Records describe Darger as withdrawn, difficult, and emotionally distant. His father, Henry Joseph Darger Sr., a tailor by trade, taught his son to read the newspaper. And when it came time for him to enter school, he was promoted from the first to the third grade because of his excellent reading ability.
Darger Sr. became lame around 1900, could no longer take care of his boy, and was admitted into St. Augustine's Home for the Aged at Fullerton and Sheffield Avenues. At age 8, young Darger was placed in the Mission of Our Lady of Mercy Catholic Orphanage and Boys' Home, which was where he first earned the nickname Crazy, and attended Skinner Elementary School.
At the age of 12, his father signed the papers that would have him sent downstate to the Asylum for Feeble-Minded Children in Lincoln. While residing at what he later referred to as that children's nut house, he suffered various forms of physical, emotional, and very likely sexual abuse.
When he was 17 and still living at the asylum, his father died, precipitating a number of attempts to run away from the institution between 1908 and 1909. On his first attempt, he was caught and returned. His second attempt resulted in him giving himself up to the police and returning again. His third and final try was successful, and he arrived at his godmother's residence in Chicago sometime afterwards.
Darger lived a solitary life, working as a janitor in a Chicago hospital from around the age of 30 until his retirement in 1963. A devout Catholic, Darger went to Mass every day, returning each night to the same narrow room.
As an adult, he only had one friend, William Schroeder. When he relocated to Texas and died in 1959, Darger took it very hard. Apart from this, he had no relationships, no ambition, no visible passion. To the outside world, Henry Darger barely existed. But invisibility doesn't mean emptiness. Sometimes it means compression.
Behind the locked doors of that room, Henry Darger was writing and writing and writing. His main work alone stretched beyond 15,000 pages, a vast epic he called The Story of the Vivian Girls. He never tried to publish it. No audience, no recognition. For decades, this world existed only for him.
The story he built was relentless, a fantasy world locked in constant war, children persecuted, innocence under threat. Psychologists note that when someone lives with chronic social isolation, imagination can become more than creativity. It becomes regulation. In fact, research shows prolonged isolation is linked to intensified fantasy emotion, where inner worlds take on emotional weight the real world cannot provide.
The drawings echoed the same tension, bright colors, childlike figures, but the emotional tone beneath was dark and repetitive. Art psychologists observe that repetition in imagery is often tied to unresolved emotional material, the mind returning to the same themes again and again, not for novelty, but for control. Importantly, there is no evidence Darger acted violently in real life. The intensity stayed on the page. So we have to ask, is disturbing art always a warning, or can it be containment?
For Darger, this wasn't escapism, it was structured. His world didn't fade when he stepped away, it waited. Psychological models of coping suggest that when external life offers little safety or connection, the mind may build an internal system that provides order, meaning, and continuity. Darger's world didn't rest when he slept, because it only existed when he returned to it.
Psychologists still debate Henry Darger. Was this trauma, depression, a response to lifelong isolation? Psychologist John McGregor considered Darger a serial killer who restrained his urges, getting the energy for his creative work from them. Later, however, McGregor softened his diagnosis and said that the artist had Asperger's syndrome. People with this disorder experience trouble communicating and are interested in a limited number of topics.
Michael Moon, on the other hand, thinks that there is no excessive aggression in Darger's work. In his opinion, the artist borrowed the scenes with excessive anatomical details from scripture. Moon thinks that aggression in Darger's work does not indicate mental issues, but a firm grasp on Christian literature that he consciously used when criticizing Catholicism.
Darger's work depicts intense, gruesome battles between the heroic Vivian sisters and the evil Glandolinians, blending themes of martyrdom, the American Civil War, and innocence in peril, representing a deeply personal, obsessive, and fantastical world centered on a child slave rebellion. The core narrative is a battle for freedom against enslavement on a fictional planet.
The work frequently features graphic violent scenes, including the mass killing of children, juxtaposed with scenes of childhood innocence. Darger once freely admitted, "I hated to see the day come when I will be grown up. I never wanted to. I always wished to be young." And he did. Darger remained young through his artwork, which was believed to be reflective of his own troubled childhood, with the innocence representative of his young age, while the extensive trauma, familial struggles, and heavy responsibilities he suffered through were possibly shown through the violence in the paintings.
This could be Darger's own anger and resentment at his childhood projected in his art, one he never got to express out loud, burdened by his responsibilities and isolation. The violence wasn't random. It was structured, repeated, almost ritualistic, as if the mind, denied expression for decades, had learned to speak only in extremes. In his paintings, he controlled the narrative, something he could never do with his real life. He decided who lived, who suffered, and who was saved. And so Darger's world raises an uncomfortable question. If imagination is the only place someone feels stable, is that pathology or survival?
Henry Darger never shared his work. He never explained it. He never defended it. When he died in 1973, he left behind no artist statement, no manifesto, just a room filled with pages no one knew existed. Only after his death was Darger labeled a genius, an outsider artist, a visionary. His manuscripts and drawings were preserved, exhibited, and sold. Today his work is housed in major museums and studied by art historians around the world. Recognition arrived, but far too late for it to matter to him, which raises an uncomfortable question. Does meaning change when it's assigned and the creator is gone?
Psychologically, what stands out isn't the acclaim, it's the intent. This wasn't art made for applause, status, or legacy. Research on creativity shows that most artists are motivated by external validation. Darger wasn't. His work aligns more closely with what psychologists call intrinsic coping behavior, creation driven by internal necessity rather than reward. In other words, this wasn't self-expression, it was self-preservation. So we're left asking, if a work saves the creator but unsettles the audience, who gets to decide its value?
After death, we turn Darger into a symbol of brilliance, of darkness, of mystery. But in life, he was simply a man trying to organize his inner world in the only way he knew how. And maybe that's the final tension of his story. We celebrate the work, we analyze it, we debate whether it's pathology or art. But for Henry Darger, it was never a question.
Henry Darger spent his life perfecting the art of being a nobody. He scrubbed the grime of the world away. But inside his own mind, he built a world for himself. Someplace vast, frightening, and intricate, like a sprawling epic where the forgotten became eternal.
His story reminds us that silence is never truly empty. It is often a storm of screams, subdued and secured. It is unsettling because it proves that a person can be known for 80 years without ever being seen. It suggests that the most violent worlds are born from the desperation of being invisible for far too long.
The Janitor's kingdom wasn't meant to be a gallery for our eyes. It was a psychological survival hunt. It exposes the brain's terrifying ability to migrate when reality becomes uninhabitable. Sometimes the mind doesn't just retreat. It realizes that if it cannot find a home in this world, it must invent a new one.